Hello everyone and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, November 25th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to have a spoiler-filled discussion about the 6th episode of HBO's Watchmen entitled This Extraordinary Being. My name is Ben Pearson, I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film writer Chris Evangelista.
Hi everyone.
Chris, it's just you and me today. Jacob couldn't be here with us, but we're gonna dive into this episode. Actually, I just remembered before we get into the meat of this conversation, you had a chance to speak with Damon Lindelof this week, or I guess last week, about Watchmen. Why don't you tell people a little bit about that in case they didn't listen to the episode of this podcast on Friday?
Yes. So I sent some questions over to Damon Lindelof, who of course is the creator of Watchmen and the executive producer, and he writes almost all the episodes. And he replied, and I also found out that Jeff Jensen, who is another writer on the show, also replied. So they sort of put their heads together for these answers. And I asked them basically to tell me all about the Robert Redford administration, because in the world of Watchmen, Robert Redford is the president. And to their credit, they took these questions, which are inherently silly, very seriously, and they gave me very serious answers. I mean, they're humorous answers, but they're played to be serious. It's played straight. And
I remember like a few. This must have been like maybe 2 weeks ago or something. You seemed racked by this idea of what the implications of Robert Redford's presidency means on the world of pop culture. Like, does the movie Sneakers exist? And I feel like you spent like 30 minutes in our Slack channel just like pulling your hair out, being like, "Wait, what does this mean? Like, if Redford is president, did this movie happen? Does this person's career go the same way?" And so you were somehow miraculously able to pose all these questions to the people who actually make the show, and even more miraculously, they had answers for you.
Right, and since these come from the people who create the show, these are all canonical. These are all official answers. We'll link to the piece. I don't want to go into it too much, just because they're actually very detailed, more detailed than I was expecting. Like, for instance, they provided a complete list of every Robert Redford movie that he made in this world, who took over for him in the Watchmen world, because obviously since he's president now, he's not making movies in that world. So those movies that he made in our world, they still exist, but they were made with different people.
And Go ahead. No.
Sadly, Sneakers does not exist, and I actually didn't think of this when I asked the question, but Sneakers is all about hacking, and the internet doesn't exist in the Watchmen world. So that's the one movie that actually doesn't exist in the Watchmen world.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. And I think they also imply that, or maybe they just outright state that Redford retained executive producer credit on a lot of these projects too. So theoretically, he's in the White House and still maybe hooked into Hollywood in some way. So
right.
Yeah, it's really great. I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. So check that out if you've not read it yet. It's a lot of fun. All right, let's dive into this episode, spoilers and all. So before we talk about what we see, I thought it might be worth mentioning really quickly the two plot lines that we don't see. We don't see Looking Glass. The previous episode basically leaves with a cliffhanger, ends with a cliffhanger, and we don't have any idea of what happened to Looking Glass. And then we also don't get Adrian Veidt. This is the one episode, I think, of this entire season where he's just not going to appear at all. Chris, did you miss either of those characters this week?
No, I mean, as much as I love Tim Blake Nelson, and as much as I love whatever it is Jeremy Irons is doing on this show, I do think this episode, if it had cut away to either of them, it would I feel like you maybe could have cut away to Looking Glass, because there are a few shots where they cut back to the police station. But if it had cut to Adrian, it would just take you completely out of the flow of the episode, because 98% of this episode is all flashback, and to suddenly stop that and go to whatever Adrian is doing on the moon or wherever he is would just really throw a wrench in the narrative.
So as you mentioned, most of this episode is flashback. It gives the definitive origin story of Hooded Justice, who is a character who appears in the graphic novel, but his identity was never confirmed. We've had a lot of speculation on our end about whether or not Hooded Justice is actually Will Reeves, and that was confirmed in this episode. I don't necessarily think that's one of those questions where the reveal coming in episode 6 is meant to be mind-bending on its own, but I do think that it's fascinating that they decided to devote an entire episode to really laying out that character's history and showing it, like, every single step of the process of him becoming that hero. What did you think about that reveal?
It's great. It's a great example of how you can retcon something while still remaining true to the source material. In the Watchmen comic, Hooded Justice is the one character, one superhero whose true identity was never revealed. And there are like theories that are mentioned in the comic, but no one knows for sure. And Lindelof and company, they found this really smart way to, give us an answer and not make it seem like cheap. Not, a lot of times when we get, a lot of times when prequels are involved, this is, for lack of a better term, this episode is sort of like a prequel. You often get answers to questions you were never really asking to begin with. It's like, I don't need to know those answers. I like, to quote that Patton Oswalt stand-up, I just like the things I like. I don't need an explanation. But this episode, it finds a way to make a prequel story tie into this new narrative they're telling. And it does it. And it feels very natural. It feels very organic. And it's also a great way to tie in, the theme of this show, which is, racism in America and the African-American experience and all this stuff, stuff that the comic didn't really deal with. The show is really tuned into that, and it feels very natural. It doesn't feel like it was shoehorned in. It doesn't feel like, oh, we got to find a way to tie the comic into our show. It actually makes sense in the world of Watchmen. And I love the way they sort of like thought of everything. In the comic, the Hooded Justice's eyes that we can see are clearly that of a white man's, and they cover that here by having Will Reeves paint his eyes a Caucasian color. So I was really impressed with, even though I feel like everyone guessed this twist like way too soon. Like everyone, like I was in on it because I had seen the episodes, and it kind of bummed me out that everyone figured it out really quickly. I still think the way they did reveal it played out really well and really satisfying.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned the eye thing, and I think this might be a good point to. I was speaking with Dave Chen a little bit about this last night. The idea that Will Reeves takes on this superhero mantle, and that Angela, his granddaughter, ends up taking on a superhero character of her own without even knowing that she's related to this guy. And there being so many similarities, like in their costumes even. She wears a hood, just like Hooded Justice has a hood. And she also spray paints her eyes, although she's spray painting her black skin black, while he's spray painting his black skin white. Just to sort of, I don't know, drawing the direct line between those two characters. I thought this episode did a really great job of even though most of the episode is a flashback, making it relevant to the stuff that we know before. And obviously Angela is experiencing all of these memories through this nostalgia pharmaceutical technology, these pills that she's taken. So I just wanted to bring that up really quickly.
Another thing I want to throw out there, I really love the way that this show sort of makes superheroes into like this whole big metaphor for like racism in general, because in the world of Watchmen, at least the show, superheroes really begin as a result of it's a direct result of a racist act. And Will Reeves, he gets lynched, but he's they let him down. His cop friends let him down, not friends, his coworkers let him down. Right. And he becomes a superhero after that. And then it's like the weird progression about how racism and white supremacy sort of like corrupts and appropriates things for their own mean, because we've gone from the very first superhero in this world being a black man to the modern equivalent is there's the Seventh Cavalry, and they're they've adopted Rorschach's thing where they're wearing masks and they're like full blown white supremacists, and it's like in the span of these decades, it's been subverted and twisted into this awful alternate version of what it was originally set out to be. And I thought that was just like a very apt metaphor for how just white supremacy sort of just tries to get in there and corrupt everything.
Yeah, it's this like foundational sin of our country, and yeah, as you said, like sort of indirectly spawned this entire superhero movement within this world. And even like the Captain Metropolis, the character that we meet in this episode, even the sort of not subtle, but I guess lower key racism than some of the more overt acts we see in this episode, that Captain Metropolis, who is also one of these costume heroes, embodies. Basically, he's pointing out like even the Minutemen, this group of superhero characters who are supposed to be Will's brothers and sisters in arms in this ongoing mission, even they won't accept him for who he really is. Captain Metropolis says, you have to stay in your costume the whole time, basically, because we don't really, I don't have enough faith in my fellow heroes that they're going to be able to accept you for who you are. So, that's what is so great about the show. You don't really see mainstream television tackling huge ideas like this and doing it in ways that are, again, like really overt, like they are in this episode, but also the subtleties to it too. It's like they're just putting a piece of string through the eye of a what is that called? One of those little
fish hook needle.
Yeah, the eye of a needle. Yeah, exactly. So they have a very, very small margin of error, and I feel like the show is just walking that tightrope perfectly. But So we talked a little bit about Hooded Justice's origin story. We see that plays out very, very differently in American Hero Story, the show within the show. Dave mentioned in our discussion last night that the grocery store set looks very, very similar to what we saw in, I think it was episode 2 of this show, the American Hero Story episode in there, where Hooded Justice goes jumping in through the front glass window and starts taking out all of these bad guys within this grocery store. And we see that same sort of set in this episode, but it's inverted, right? Like he jumps out of the window to escape, and I think it speaks to what you were talking about just a second ago, like the idea of history being written by the winners and sort of being distorted over time, and people of color being either erased altogether from it, or their contributions being either twisted or downplayed significantly. So I think that's some of that subtlety I'm talking about, where it's just like the show it's so good, Chris. It's so good. How is it so good?
It's very good. Yeah.
So June, we see this character June, who is Will Reeves's reporter girlfriend, who I guess that's another way that this show just sort of draws the connection to the Superman story. It makes that like very overt in this episode.
Right. Superman, there's also a little Batman too, because he Hooded Justice breaks up a big mugging in an alley, which is of course how Batman's parents were killed. So
yeah. I
like those two very overt I felt like a lot of people are saying this is the best episode, and I kind of think last week's was better, just because I think as good as this episode is great. I love the direction. I love the style. I think it's a little too on the nose with a few, like some of the dialogue is really hammy. Like that June character is like, the only way you're going to get justice, Will Reeves, is if you wear a hood. And it's like, all right, that's a little too unsubtle for me.
That's some of that prequelitis thing you're talking about.
And they even have like Will Reeves reads the Superman origin comic, and then they show a quick flashback to the Tulsa thing, which is his origin story, and it's like, all right, we get it. You don't have to underline it that much. And I feel like those those little details are the only things that kept me from thinking this was the best episode, even though I do think this is like a groundbreaking episode of television. I think that says a lot about how good this show is, that even something that this groundbreaking isn't quite the best episode.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we find out that June, who really serves as sort of Hooded Justice's Alfred in this episode, you're talking about the Batman connection too. I thought it was pretty clear that she was meant to be sort of the Alfred figure in his life, like, encouraging him and sort of being there for him in his home environment. We find out that she is the little girl that very young Will picked up in that field outside of Tulsa. Was I the only one who was a little creeped out by the fact that they're romantically linked and she reveals that she's pregnant? Like this, I don't know. What did you make of that reveal, Chris?
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. For one thing, it's tossed off really like it's almost like after the fact. It's like, oh, by the way, you were that baby in that field. And then for them to be in a relationship is very weird, because I'm guessing they like grew up together. And
yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
I'm assuming we're going to learn a little bit more about that, because even though this episode gives us a ton of background on Will, there's still a lot of stuff we don't know. Like for one reason, we don't really know why he's suddenly like targeting people like why he was targeting Judd, out of like all of a sudden after all these years. Mm-hmm. So there are still like questions that have to be answered, and I am wondering if we're going to learn more about that character. And at the same time, it's clear that Will. I don't know. Like, all right, so do we want to talk about Will's sexuality? Because I don't know how
Sure.
we should address like. So it's, obviously I don't know if we're meant to, imply what the relationship is between him and like if he's just supposed to be bisexual, if he is sort of like doesn't actually even know what he is, because he ends up having I don't want to call it a romance because it's clearly not romantic, but he ends up having a sexual relationship with Captain Metropolis. So the show sort of does this. I appreciated that it doesn't like label it. It doesn't like hammer it home what Will's sexuality is, but at the same time, it also is very gray. It's not like defined fully, I think.
Yeah, I sort of took it as, he's living this double, like almost triple life in a time period where he's clearly not accepted, as I mentioned before, even by the sort of hero compatriots who are supposed to be standing by his side. And like the idea that he could explore his sexuality in an open way in 1930s New York just seemed too out of reach, I think, for that character at that time. So I'm glad that they didn't really go into that anymore, because it really, you sort of get all you need to know from it, I think, in terms of like, I don't personally need to know how many other relationships he had with other people, or any more about his relationship with Captain Metropolis. I sort of like understood what the broad brush strokes that they were trying to make there, but yeah, it is interesting. Like it's such a, I think it's all about the time period, right? Like he just I don't know. It's a complicated thing to talk about, but I think I think that's probably where they landed, was just like this idea that he's wearing masks. It's masks on masks on masks in this case, but yeah. So let's talk about the plan that he uncovers. So this whole thing about beware the Cyclops.
Right. This is the other thing I have a little bit of a problem with.
Oh, okay. So yeah, hit me with that. What do you got?
So I know it sounds silly to say a show that's about superheroes is getting a little too unbelievable, but throwing in like a subplot about like the Klan is hypnotizing people it's almost too science fiction-y. Am I like wrong? Did you buy that fully? Or
so, I don't know. I have to say I thought that this was sort of perfectly Watchmen-y, like the idea of like this being a show where a giant squid is telepathically transported into or psychically it has psychic damage powers basically, right. And it's teleported into New York. I thought it was kind of on that same level. I guess I could see the case where like you already have that, so this plan separately is maybe taking it a step too far, but because of the way that the show has portrayed especially the topic of race already, I have to admit that there's a part of me that wondered if this was actually a real thing that the Klan tried to do and maybe didn't succeed in doing, but because like it opens with the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, which I'd never heard of before this show. And in this very episode, there's a newspaper clipping that talks about how I think it's something like 20,000 people, like Nazis, have a rally at Madison Square Garden or something. And like that is actually a real thing that happened. So the show does this really good job of like weaving real world events, even with Bass Reeves, like the movie star hero character that inspires Will. He was like a real guy, and I'd never heard of him too. So there's part of me that wonders, like, is this a real, Klan plot that they actually tried, and I just never heard of it before, because history is often, like we said, sort of written by people who may not want this kind of information to be publicized. I don't know. What did you think about that? You're on the side.
I actually had the same thought, although at the same time it's like it's so far out that it can't be based on something that's like 100% real. Yeah. But I'm sure they're drawing on. I mean, like covert racism is like a real thing where it's racism that's like concealed in society, and it's often concealed in such a way that it's almost subliminal. So it could be like a very literal way of interpreting that, maybe, but. I'm not saying it didn't work. I just felt like it was so. Everything else in this episode felt really grounded, and then out of nowhere, it's like, by the way, the Klan have a book about hypnotism, and they're using it to hypnotize people, and I don't think it fit entirely with the rest of the episode. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
at the same time, I gotta think that like this has to tie directly into whatever it is that Lady True and Will are up to. Like the millennial clock thing has to have some sort of hypnotism involved with it. Now that we know that Will has a super hypnotizing flashlight that he just carries around.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking that too. And that's another way I think that the episode sort of links these two time periods together. And I thought also like the whole subliminal thing of, this voice telling theater audiences that, that, like black people have to commit violence against each other and all of that. I thought that was sort of a precursor to the psychic trauma that the giant squid represents later on in the show too. So even if that is never touched upon again, which I believe that there's got to be some sort of mention with that with the Millennium Clock. But I thought it was a good way to sort of draw that line between the two. And like the Cyclops, this I guess it's like a subgroup of the KKK, this Greek mythological figure with one eye, and also the giant squid itself only had one eye too. So I think that there's that.
I couldn't figure out like if the Cyclops is the name of the group or if there's like an actual person. I felt like that maybe I missed it or something. It sounded to me like there was actually a person they're referring to as the Cyclops, but I don't know.
I think it's a group because you see that symbol that like one eye symbol that almost looks like a like a what do you call that, like a key or like a legend on a map, like with the north, south, east, and west, and that symbol was used in I didn't recognize it because I'd never seen it before, but you see it very clearly in this episode. And then in some of the PDpedia material earlier, I was talking on I think last week's episode about a reader sent me a tweet saying like one of the letters that I think it was Judd Crawford's Senator Keene's ancestor had sent to Judd Crawford's ancestor was signed with this Klan thing, like a Klansman I am, or whatever the AKIA I think was the initials that they used, and that Cyclops symbol was used as like a stamp right next to the signature on that. And it didn't mean anything to me when I read it because I hadn't seen this episode yet, but that strikes me as all falling into line to represent that it's more of a group than a single person. But
the only thing that makes me think it's a person is because like in the actual KKK, like the leader is like the Grand Cyclops. That was the only thing I was drawing.
Oh, is that real? Is that what they actually call him? Oh, I always thought it was like a Grand Wizard, but
there's like wizard. There's I don't know. I have to brush up on my KKK lingo, but I know there is a Grand Cyclops in the KKK.
Interesting. Okay, so that is sort of building on and sort of weaving real world material in with this sort of almost quasi supernatural kind of stuff or sci-fi kind of stuff too. So, we talked a lot on last week's episode, especially about how the show is about passing down trauma to the next generation. We see the scene where Will's son dresses up like Hooded Justice, and Will like freaks out about it. What did you think about that? Like the seeing Will's home life and sort of the deterioration of that as he, goes deeper and deeper into this Hooded Justice persona as the episode goes on.
Yeah, I do love how this character is portrayed and just his progression, because they even say early on, like June says early on to him, that he's like an angry guy. And it's like, yes, he does. He is sort of seeking justice in a way against, racial injustice and justice in general. But he's also got issues. And I really love that the show continues with that gray area thing where there are no real like clear heroes or villains. And even though I think, all of Will's actions in this episode are justified to an extent, he still is going down this path where he goes from, crime fighter to like full-blown murderer. And I'm not saying, oh, those poor Klansmen, like go ahead, Will Reeves, by all means, kill all the Klansmen in Watchmen. But it is, the show does portray in a way where he's sort of like losing his soul in a process where he starts off as this righteous guy, and he joins the police force out of this sort of misplaced idea that he's going to do some good, and it just the system itself like beats him down. He realizes there's no way to be that Bass Reeves character. Like that character, June points out, like that movie is so like sugar coated and such bullshit that like there is really no way to be that noble hero that everyone loves in the quote unquote real world. And I think it dawns on him in that moment where he sees his son dressing up in the costume, and it leads to this whole blow up thing where his wife leaves him and goes back to Tulsa and all that.
Yeah, and there's this great shot too where he's standing in front of the warehouse as it's, he's just murdered all these guys and he's burnt down the warehouse, and it shows this quick flashback moment to outside of Tulsa when he was a little kid and seeing the flames, licking the city and the smoke rising up from that too. And it's just this really, really fast moment, but I think that's, the show trying to say, okay, this guy, he may be like on a sort of morally righteous path here, but he also is sort of losing himself, as you mentioned. He's sort of like going a little bit too far here. So I think it's just that complexity that the show like really loves to use in almost every situation, not just with its villains like Adrian Veidt and his motivations for sending that squid in, but also with the heroes too. So it's really great stuff. So
it's a good show. That's what we're getting at.
It is. And we talked about generational trauma. One of the other big ideas that this show keeps returning to is this idea of legacy. And in this episode, we learn about Will Reeves' legacy in his origin story, but we also get a glimpse into the legacy of the Crawford family when Judd is confronted about the KKK robe in his closet. So do you think that scene establishes that Judd was essentially a good guy with like a tarnished family history, or do you think we still have more to learn about Judd's potential involvement with the Klan in future episodes?
I really think it's just more of that gray area thing. I love I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I love the line exchange between those two characters because, Will is like, you have a Klan robe hidden in your closet. And Judd is like, oh, well, I have a right to keep it. It's part of my legacy. And Will says, like, well, if you're proud of your legacy, how can you hide it away? Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a great way of establishing the way that people who are racist and don't actually realize they're racist, like people who have, like, it's not, I don't want to say it's not their fault, but it's like, if you grow up in a certain background, like in a previous episode, Angela asks Looking Glass, like, did you know Crawford was a racist? And he says, well, he's a white man from Oklahoma. And it's like, that's not excusing his racism, but it's a way of saying, like, that's the world he comes from. And like, I think that's, I don't know what Judd's ultimate involvement was. I mean, he clearly has some association with the 7th Cavalry because, Keene said so last week. So he's not a good guy if he's lining up with white supremacists, but I think it's just more of that complicated thing. I love that this show does not paint things in broad strokes. It really wants you to stop and consider these characters. Like, I can't think of another show dealing with this subject matter, like superhero material. Even like I can't think of a movie that's like that tries this hard to make you consider multiple sort of angles from everyone's perspective. And it's such. I know we just keep joking and saying like this show is good, but it's such a good show, and I can't get over how well done it is.
Yeah. The only other question I think I had was at the very end of the episode when Angela is sort of coming out of her trance a little bit. Was that an older version of June at the end? I think it's meant to be. Like, you know, we see as Angela's memories and Will's memories are sort of converging on that spot at Judd's hanging spot, basically. You know, you start to see like drummers in the background. You start to see Will's mother playing the piano, she's been sort of a constant presence throughout this episode. And then I think you see June essentially like materialize out of thin air and speak to Angela as if she's speaking to Will and saying, you know, all right, this is it. Like, you know, I'm taking the kid
Right.
and going back to Tulsa. Like, for all intents and purposes, we don't exist to you anymore. And then we see this older woman who basically leans in and she says, she does look like you. I'm going to take you home now, honey. And that's when Angela is sort of jerked back into the present, I guess. The idea of her saying she does look like you, like if this is June, which I think we're meant to believe it is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's her.
Do you think she's talking to Will? Like she's maybe standing next to Will in the present time and saying, you know, she does look like you, like as if they've been speaking about Angela. And then
I don't think it's a present time, but I definitely think it implies that at some point Will tracked June down in Tulsa, and they are probably talking about Angela when she was like a baby, I guess. But
okay.
I don't. Because just the way they're talking, it sounds like they're talking about a baby.
Yeah,
so.
I didn't think about that. She says, I'm going to take you home now, honey. So that could very well be like from the hospital or something too. So I did not consider that. And I was just wondering if you thought that June, maybe like this older version of June, might also still be around and potentially involved in whatever Will is getting himself into. Or do you think that was like a mid flashback where she's no longer in the picture?
Yeah, I think that was a mid flashback, but I could be wrong. I actually just got the next 2 episodes. I only had the first 6, so
Chris, you bastard.
I'm gonna watch at least the next one probably tonight or tomorrow because I want to get my review in before Thanksgiving because I don't want to work during Thanksgiving. So I hope I find out more.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the episode's aesthetic choices. You mentioned, I think in the very beginning, how you loved the look of it. And, you know, you've got most of this flashback taking place in black and white. You've got a lot of specks of color mixed in there as well. Somebody tweeted to us basically saying that it might be a reference to Spielberg's Pale Horse, like the Schindler's List version of the movie that he made in this universe. I think it's just a way to sort of visualize the different time periods and stuff. Like you see that really great shot that sort of took my breath away was when Will Reeves is walking his beat and the cop car pulls up next to him and the guys basically say, hey, you know, come out for a drink. They're sort of like bullying him into coming out with them. And then he says, no thanks, you know, maybe another time. And they drive away and you see the bodies being dragged in color behind this black and white vehicle. And it's just, I thought the episode did such a great job of really establishing the idea visually that this pain, this trauma that people live with never actually leaves them. Even the ones that they didn't experience themselves in, you know, I guess young Will did experience that himself. But for Angela, you know, as the experiencer of this nostalgia, to get that glimpse of like, this is 1938 New York City, but she's seeing images from 1921 Tulsa, you know, blending together. What did you think about the episode's use of like you know, black and white photography and like the Steadicam, where so much of it is like supposed to be one continuous shot, all that stuff?
Oh, it's so good. The look of this episode is phenomenal. You know, the way that there's always these like Will's like mother is like almost always in the background, like playing the piano, which I thought was such a cool, like disturbing little touch. And yeah, like you said, the way that they not the whole episode, but a lot of it is made to look like this sort of like one continuous flowing shot where the camera, like the way you move to a next scene is the camera just gets up and moves you there. Like the scene doesn't cut. And I thought that was just really well done. I also love the way that they kept swapping Regina King in for, I forget the actor's name who plays the young Will.
Jovan Adepo.
Yes, they just keep cutting back and forth. And I was reading a little bit about this, and it was shot, they sort of like did it almost like live, where they would like, the minute the camera cut away, like Regina King would like rush into the shot and vice versa.
Oh, wow.
And they had to like practice that and get it down. And it looks like seamless. Like it never looks, you're never like, I spot the trick. It just looks like it's all very natural. And it's a great way of highlighting that even though this episode is a flashback, it is sort of like a dream too, because she's hallucinating all of this. And it has that really dreamlike quality where everything seems like not quite real, even though it is. And I just love the aesthetic of that.
Yeah. There's one thing that, and I'm sorry to keep referencing this conversation that I had with Dave Chen last night, but I'll link to that in the show notes if people are interested in watching it. But one thing that he pointed out that I didn't really think about is the idea of the slow-mo. So we see like American hero story within the confines of the show. We've talked about how, it might be Lindelof and his crew either paying homage to or making fun of Zack Snyder's take on Watchmen. You have very like speed ramping and all this sort of Snyder-esque visual hallmarks in the way that show within the show is depicted. But this episode, that moment I mentioned before where Hooded Justice jumps out of the window to escape, the whole thing freezes and the camera sort of moves around like a Matrix style. And I was just wondering if you thought that by the real show taking that same visual aesthetic from American Hero Story, if that was in some way Lindelof and his team maybe trying to soften the blow a little bit on people who were, not that they're reacting in real time to what people are saying, but to soften the perception that maybe they were just mercilessly dunking on Zack Snyder. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that shot in particular is almost identical to the Watchmen movie opening credits, where there's like that, everything like freezes and the camera moves around. And so I feel like it has to be some sort of reference to that. Whether or not it's dunking or not, I don't know, because I think Lindelof gets along with Zack Snyder. I don't know what their relationship is. I mean, I know he was one of the people tweeting about the Snyder cut, so he clearly has some sort of relationship with Zack Snyder. But whether it's dunking or not, I don't know. I do think it's impossible to like divorce that style from Zack Snyder, because that's just what his style is. So
yeah, and especially within the world of Watchmen, like he's the only other person who's directed a live action Watchmen property, so it's sort of impossible to ignore.
Maybe they're gonna do like some really super meta thing in the last episode where they reveal the Watchmen movie exists in this world and it was directed by Zack Snyder.
Wow, that would be incredible. Okay, so let's get to Theory Corner before we wrap up. This is just the part of the show where we talk about either random theories that we've had or in this case, one that I wanted to read from an email. Somebody, Dave from Woodstock, Connecticut, sent us an email and said, hey guys, I just finished the most recent Flash on Daily episode about Watchmen. It was discussed how Adrian Veidt finally escaped his Jovian prison on one of the moons of Jupiter. Europa, he says, with a question mark, which sidebar, I think I listened to an episode with, or a podcast with Damon Lindelof, and he confirmed that it was Europa where Adrian Veidt was imprisoned. So back to Dave's email, he said, it made me think it takes 12 Earth years for Jupiter to orbit the sun. Does that mean by last candle count, Veidt has been up there for at least 36 years? Or does time measure differently inside Veidt's prison bubble? If so, does this provide a clue to the manipulation of time by the future Millennium Clock? Thanks, Dave. So what do you make of that, Chris? Do you think that the fact that Jupiter's moon takes longer to orbit the sun has anything to do with the way that time has been playing out in the Adrian Veidt storyline?
I mean, I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, it could be, but I don't know.
Yeah, sorry that we don't have a more a better answer for you, Dave. But that is a fascinating thing, and I guess there's no way to really know until we see more of the show. But let's see what else. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the Millennium Clock. So with the reveal at the end of this episode that old Will still has been able to sort of I guess I don't know if the implication is that he's the one who has been perfecting this mesmerism technology where he was able to convince Judd to hang himself, or if he just I don't know if the 7th Cavalry has that technology or what. But what do you think? How do you think that might play into Lady True's plan with the Millennium Clock? Do you have any theories on that, Chris?
I don't know how it's going to play out. I do think whatever that hypnotism thing is going to tie directly into the clock, and I do think it's something about like waking people up to the truth about the squid attack, but I don't know why Lady True would be interested in that. So I can't really figure out how that ties into, and I can't figure out how it ties into Senator Keene's thing either. I guess we need to know if Senator Keene and the 7th Cavalry is working with Lady True, but I feel like that can't be because she's also working with Will, unless she's working with both of them and playing them against each other. I don't know where that connection is, but yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if she might use that same technology to try to broadcast something to the entire world, because I think one of the things that that the Beware the Cyclops plot gets at is this idea that like media is used to I don't know, like almost like
brainwash people.
Yeah, and to simplify it incredibly, to sort of keep black people down, like the idea that that they are putting information out there subliminally in this case. But I think a case could be made that this is a commentary on a larger state of media as a whole is right. Is releasing imagery out there for the world to consume, where that it just perpetuates stereotypes, or insert any number of things there to sort of keep things operating at a status quo. And I wonder if that is a hint of something to come with the Millennium Clock, and how that technology, that sort of mesmerism technology, may be used, and the idea of like broadcasting to the world, maybe to flip that idea on its head, maybe like you're saying, to sort of spread the truth to everybody. I wonder if the Millennium Clock itself, if that location of where exactly that was built is like a strategic location where she might be able to use a bigger version of that technology to, I don't know, like cloak the entire planet in in like some sort of broadcast or something. I was reading the Pedia entry this morning, and there's a Tulsa newspaper article that says that Lady True sent newly legalized HD TVs to every residence in the Tri-County area as an apology for any inconvenience our construction efforts may cause, as well as the occasional atmospheric disruption. And that was right around the time that I think the article was dated 2018, and we're in like 2019 now. But the idea of atmospheric disruptions stood out to me as like, oh, could that be the height of the Millennium Clock? Maybe that has something to do with broadcasting into the atmosphere and being able to draw people's attention skyward. I don't know. It also says that Beyond, who I think we know is Lady True's daughter, it says that Lady True's mother is also named Beyond. So I don't know if that means that this is literally the same person. I think there was some speculation about that online, like maybe this girl that we think is the daughter is actually either a clone of her mother or an age-reversed version of her actual mother or something like that. It also references the theory that the clock is a time machine, which we talked about before. When the reporter for that in-world newspaper posed that question to a True Industries spokeswoman, she responded, "You have an incredible imagination. Your theory is most entertaining, but I hope you won't be disappointed when it doesn't come true. Sometimes a clock is just a clock, So I definitely think it's more than just a clock, but I wonder if the idea of this theory, I hope you won't be disappointed when it doesn't come true, is a way for Lindelof and his people to be like gently letting us down, because I think that's a big thing with like fan culture, right? Is like when people latch onto theories and they end up not being true. I think that's where a lot of the discontent comes with people reacting to like major blockbusters and stuff. They've been, scouring Reddit threads for so long that they've just been, hooked into these ideas that they found early, and then when the movie actually is trying to tell its own story, people get really mad about that. So I wonder if this is Lindelof and his people sort of just trying to let people down gently in advance when their disappointment manifests when it's not actually a time machine. But what do you make of all that, Chris?
Yeah, I think that is spot on. Even though I myself had theorized maybe there's time travel involved, I would not be surprised if that's them literally like winking at us and saying it's not that. Don't. Yeah.
What do you think about the atmospheric disruption and the idea of like broadcasting something to the world from the Millennium Tower as like the hub of that broadcast?
I do think that sounds about right, although that is also the plot of Batman Returns with the Riddler. Or Batman Forever, sorry. The Riddler does that. So I don't know if they're deliberately ripping off Batman Forever or what, but...
Oh, man, that's great. Well, I can't think of a better place to end this episode than with a Batman Forever reference. So maybe we'll let Seal's Kiss by a Rose play us out on today's episode. But, okay, before we go, let's tell people where they can find more of our work online. Chris, where can people find your stuff?
/film.com, and I'm on Twitter at Evangelista413.
You can find me writing at /film.com as well. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pearson, and you can find more about Watchmen at /film.com. I'm going to link to a bunch of things in the show notes, including Monique Jones has been writing, I guess, a sort of a Watchmen column for us, like a couple days after the episodes air. So if if you watched last night's episode and were slightly disappointed that two white guys were talking about it on a podcast, you can at least have one more perspective, a perspective from a person of color on /film.com. So definitely read all those articles that I'll link to in the show notes there. /Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns, and Watchmen theories to us at peter@/film.com.